I'm glad we raised the debt ceiling and didn't default on America's credit. We got that done, not just for a few months. We got that done into 2013. So we don't have that leverage used against us again to ask for unreasonable cuts in government services. We were successful in doing that. So let me just share with you what's in the budget agreement and how I think it will affect federal workers and federal retirees. The first round of cuts are a little less than $1 trillion. These are cuts over 10 years. And I think these cuts are manageable. And let me tell you why I say that. And I think you need to understand that these cuts will be implemented through the normal appropriation process. So it's unclear as to how much a particular agency will receive. But the overall numbers are, I think, better than we would have hoped earlier this year. After all, we had the 2010 elections. The House of Representatives is controlled by the Republicans, and the Republicans have a different vision of government service than the Democrats do. Let me explain the numbers to you. The Republican budget that was passed over from the House to the Senate would have cut our domestic discretionary spending by about 13%. You start looking around, 13% reduction. That's not manageable. You can't perform the government services we're performing today with 13% less support. It would have meant not only would it have hit the federal workforce, it would have told American families many would no longer be able to afford colleges because Pell Grants would have been cut. It would have told our families that are in Head Start that many of you won't be able to be in a Head Start program. And the list goes on and on and on. This is the discretionary domestic budget, which, by the way, the Census Bureau comes under. A 13% cut. Now, we went through this in the current year's budget in 2011. And we saw where the president said, okay, we understand we have a tough budget. We'll hold the line. That wasn't good enough for the Republicans. And they brought out a huge cut. And we negotiated, and we ended up with a significant cut that we had to absorb. Well, this year, the Republicans were asking for 13% on top of what we did in FY11. Where do we end up? What's in the budget agreement? We ended up with basically no cut, less than 1%. Now, I'm not going to tell you that's a great deal. It's not. You're being asked to do more with less. But considering where we could have been under the Republican budget, we now have a manageable budget going into October 1st. Now, let's just suppose that we reach October 1 and we don't have appropriation bills. Never happened before, has it? And then you don't know what's going to happen. But now we do know what's going to happen. We do know the appropriation level for FY12. So we may not get all the budgets done by October 1, but we're in a far better position looking at what the continuing resolutions will look like. These are, I think, important certainties that came out of the budget agreement. If we didn't have a budget agreement, we would be fighting not only on the debt ceiling, perhaps again in a few months, but we'd be fighting on the budget on October 1, the continuing resolution, what level it should be at. The Republicans would be insisting that it's a 5% less or a 10% less. But now we can at least hold them to the agreement that has been signed into law that has given us allocations. We have deemed a budget to have been passed. Congress has a budget for FY12. Now, that's the first round the almost $1 trillion. There's a second round coming, and it's coming quickly by this joint committee. And that second round of cuts require us to have at least $1.2 trillion. Now I'm going to tell you, I hope the joint committee comes in with a balanced approach that looks beyond discretionary spending, that says, look, we really need to look at the revenues, we need to look at mandatory spending, we need to come in with a program that truly manages our deficit. I hope they'll do that. I hope they don't come back at discretionary spending, because I think we've already made those types of savings. And when you look at the years under the original agreement, they're going to be tough years for us to make. We have a little bit of growth, but not enough growth in the domestic budgets. The second round will be decided by a committee of 12 members of Congress, but must be approved by Congress. We either approve it or we don't. In the event that we don't reach an agreement, that we're unable to, either the joint committee is deadlocked or Congress rejects or the President vetoes the recommendation from the joint committee, then there's automatic cuts known as sequestration. We've been through this before. Grand Rubman Hollins. Let's take a look what would happen if Congress does not reach an agreement. We would have cuts of $1.2 trillion over 10 years. And that would be 50% coming from the Department of Defense and 50% from the domestic budget, including mandatory spending, not just discretionary spending. However, certain programs are protected. Social Security, no cuts. Medicaid, no cuts. Low-income programs, no cuts. Medicare is limited to a 2% cut, and it cannot come out of the beneficiaries. It must come from the providers or from the insurance companies. Federal retirees are protected. Federal pensions are protected. That means there is no automatic addition, contributions for federal pension benefits. So we have protection in the sequestration for matters that are of particular concern to the Democratic Party's constituency. I mention that because we do have these partisan divisions. We have to acknowledge that. I hope the Joint Committee works in a nonpartisan environment. I don't think that's likely. The point I want to raise is, and again, I'm not trying to sell you on this process. Believe me, I'm not. We were not, that those of us who believe in supporting our federal workforce, we're not in a good bargaining position when we're negotiating against a group that believes it's acceptable to violate the debt limit and default on our obligations. That's tough to negotiate with. People believe that. On sequestration, we have a much more even playing field. I don't want to see automatic cuts. That's not the way government should operate. But when you look at it, who will be most impacted by it, defense contractors, and we protected our principal low-income programs, it seems to me that there's incentives on both parties to make sure we have a response. So let me just tell you, as the senator from Maryland, who deeply respects each one of you for your service as a federal employee, and I know I speak for Senator Mikulski, I know I speak for Congresswoman Edwards and Congressman Hoyer, Congressman Van Hollen. We're going to stand up and defend what you do every day. We're going to make sure that's in the debate as we move forward. We know that the sacrifices that you have made. We know the abuse that you take. And we are going to be there fighting to make sure that we protect the federal workforce. We know that on comparable pay, we are still not where we need to be. And compensation includes not just salary, but the benefit package. So we are there to say, look, we can't tell you the outcome, but we'll tell you we're going to fight to make sure that you are treated fairly in this budget agreement. So let me just tell you, as the senator from Maryland, who deeply respects each one of you for your service as a federal employee, and I know I speak for Senator Mikulski, I know I speak for Congresswoman Edwards and Congressman Hoyer and Congressman Van Hollen. We're going to stand up and defend what you do every day. We're going to make sure that's in the debate as we move forward. We know that the sacrifices that you have made. We know the abuse that you take. And we are going to be there fighting to make sure that we protect the federal workforce. We know that on comparable pay, we are still not where we need to be. And compensation includes not just salary, but the benefit package. So we are there to say, look, we can't tell you the outcome, but we'll tell you we're going to fight to make sure that you are treated fairly in this budget agreement.